Keeneland, every moment matters.
Welcome to another edition of the TDN Writers Room podcast. My name is Bill Finley. I write for the Thoroughbred Daily News. Also co-host the Down the Stretch radio show every Saturday morning on Sirius XM Radio with Dave Johnson. Tune us in, channel 85, 10 Eastern Time to 1.
Hey, what a plug. I love that. How y'all doing? I'm Randy Moss with NBC Sports.
Zoe Cadman with First Racing and First TV. Delighted to see smiles on both of your faces today.
Yeah, we were a little grumpy at the start last week, but I think we got our game faces on for today because we have some great racing from last weekend to talk about. It was the last weekend of major preps for the Kentucky Derby, highlighted by the Bluegrass and, of course, the Santa Anita Derby and the Wood Memorial at Aqueduct, the last ever Wood Memorial to be run at the Big A, by the way. That's kind of a sad thought. But let's start off with the Bluegrass. And wow. We got a wow performance out of Further Ado. Not really, that's the best way to describe it. You guys know the story right now. He won by 11 lengths, got a 106 buyer. Spendthrift Farms, who had the original winter book favorite for the Kentucky Derby, and Ted Nafi got hurt. Now they quite possibly could have the favorite for this year's Kentucky Derby. So, Zoe, I'll start off with you. I guess the only knock on him at this point, well, first I want to obviously find out what you thought about the race, but I want you to address the one question that I'm sure people will be bringing up between now and the Derby. Is he just some sort of Keeneland freak? He broke his maiden there by 20. He wins the Bluegrass by 11, and he runs outside of Keeneland. He seems to be a different horse. He's not a bad horse, but the horse that shows up at Keeneland is a monster, and we haven't seen that at other racetracks.
You're not wrong. The son of Gunrunner, Further Ado. He's an absolute monster at Keeneland, and it's something, that Brad Cox alluded to as well. We'd be super confident if the race was at Keeneland. Well, it's not at Keeneland. He ran fast. He ran the fastest time since 2018 when Essential Quality ran the race, and he won by open lengths. It was a Gunrunner exacta. Actually, it wasn't a Gunrunner exacta because the second place finisher, how do you say that? Otino for Chad Brown? He's a half brother to Gunrunner. So it's all about Gunrunner in the Bluegrass. He was, an eighth of a mile back, but he punched his ticket as well. We'll just have to wait and see what he does at Churchill Downs, but he was visually impressive for sure. You cannot knock him for that.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here. I mean, I think he'll probably wind up being the betting favorite for the Kentucky Derby.
You think?
Yeah, because to me, the betting public pays a lot of attention to margins of victory. And I think that was evident by the conclusion of the Kentucky Derby future wager last week, which was wrapped up before we saw the Bluegrass and the Santa Anita Derby and the Wood. But Renegade was 4-1 and Commandment was 7-1. That's a pretty big swing for a couple of horses that numbers wise and, most people thought were really, really evenly matched. And I think it's because Renegade drew off and won the Arkansas Derby by 4 lengths, and Commandment was life and death to beat the Puma in the Florida Derby. I think people seize on that kind of thing and lean more toward the big margin. And now you have an 11-length winner of the Bluegrass with the top buyer speed figure 106. So for those reasons, I think he'll probably wind up being the betting favorite. I'm not absolutely convinced about that. I am not a huge believer in the whole Keeneland versus Churchill Downs, that there's that much of a difference in the footing or anything else that would make such a gigantic difference going forward. Yes, so far it looks on paper this horse's 2 best races have been at Keeneland, but I tend to think that's more circumstantial than anything else. There is also this to at least keep in the back of your mind, okay? When he won at Keeneland last year and broke his maiden by 20 lengths, they sent him to Churchill Downs and ran him in the Kentucky Jockey Club. And he caught what's a weak field, right? Universe was second, Soldier and Diplomat was third. Neither of those 2 horses are good enough to make the Kentucky Derby. And yet, Further Ado had to work really hard to beat those 2 horses narrowly, fairly narrowly, in a much slower speed figure than he had earned at Keeneland. And that led people to believe, okay, well, he's not as good at Churchill Downs as he was at Keeneland. 3 weeks, I think, maybe less than that. after the Kentucky Jockey Club, the horse got extremely sick. And Brad Cox is not really 100% sure if something wasn't in his system and something wasn't affecting his performance when he ran in the Kentucky Jockey Club. So that's something to at least keep in mind as a possible explanation for why he wasn't nearly as impressive in the Kentucky Jockey Club as he was at Keeneland. The other thing I want to point out is that, and this might go the other way, this might go against Further Ado for some people. Like if it was Bill Mott or some of these other trainers, let's say, the Bluegrass is obviously a big race to win, but the Kentucky Derby is the big enchilada, and they use these prep races as a stepping stone for the big race and then really knuckle down on the horses when they get to Kentucky. They'd like to win the Bluegrass, sure, but it's not really the destination. In this particular case, this horse was trained to win the Bluegrass because Spendthrift considers it a stallion enhancing victory, right? In the heart of Kentucky. I mean, here's a son of Gunrunner, a grade 1 win in the Bluegrass. And so I don't think you can expect Further Ado to go to Kentucky now and take a progression, take a step forward. They're just hoping that he can hold serve and continue that form when he gets to Kentucky. That's a question. Can he do it or not?
Yeah, I think you bring up some good points, Randy. And also it's worth mentioning, I mean, you mentioned about Brad Cox. He has 3 of the top 5 horses on the points earning list. So he's going to come into the Kentucky Derby with a very, very strong hand. And I also think you're underestimating your own figures. I think the 106 buyer figure is what's going to make him the favorite in the Kentucky Derby because, you know, that's what people gravitate towards. And that's a huge number. Could he regress off that? Of course he would. But I think that 106, which is who's next? What's the gap back to? It's like 100 or Commandment or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty huge gap. That to me makes me think that he is going to be the favorite. So,
and here's another interesting and very unusual angle. Okay, so Brad Cox has got 3 horses. He's got Further Ado, Commandment, and Full Effort, who had just a recent fantastic workout. He's looking for a new jockey for all 3, including the likely favorite for the Kentucky Derby. John Velasquez is going to wind up riding Further Ado in the Kentucky Derby because Irad Ortiz will instead ride Renegade, the winner of the Arkansas Derby. Commandment is going to wind up being ridden by Luis Saez because Flavian Pratt is going to ride Emerging Market for Chad Brown in the Kentucky Derby. So all 3 of Cox's horses, and Full Effort is either going to be ridden by Brian Hernandez Jr. or Tyler Gaffleone. They're trying to decide there. So all 3 of Cox's horses have got to have new riders now for the Kentucky Derby.
Is this Randy Moss speculating or do you have inside information?
No, this is what's going to happen.
Okay. You are always on top of these things. Not seen that reported anywhere, but I will certainly trust your opinion on that. So maybe we have an exclusive here on the TDN Writers Room podcast, courtesy of Randy Moss. Okay, so let's move on to the Santa Anita Derby. And the story was more, So Happy obviously was the story. A son of Run Happy. Yes, a Run Happy can go 1.125 and win. Run Happy, after all that effort that Jim McIngvale did to promote him to Sire, was shipped off to Korea, South Korea, of course. So it's not going to do him much good when it comes to that. I don't think anybody's going to put So Happy among their top 5 or 6 or even 7 or 8 in their Kentucky Derby top 10s, etc. But the story was more about the people. Mike Smith winning this race. If he wins the Kentucky Derby, he will be the oldest rider ever to win the Kentucky Derby. He is going to be the oldest rider ever to ride in the Kentucky Derby. And Zoe mentioned earlier the very sentimental story of trainer Mark Glatt, whose wife Dina died about 2 months before the race of heart failure. You could see, Randy, how emotional he was after the race. One other point I'd like to make, and then I'll throw it to you guys. I picked Cherokee Nation. Horse doesn't get out of the gate. He has no chance. He didn't get out of the gate. and he ran up the track. So there's a very talented horse trained by perhaps one of the greatest trainers in the history of the sport, but they have not figured out how to get this horse out of the starting gate, and it cost them once again.
Yeah, a 100 Beyer speed figure for So Happy in the Santa Anita Derby, which matches Commandment's Beyer speed figure in winning the Florida Derby. So on numbers, So Happy fits. Pedigree-wise, he's a son of Run Happy, who's obviously a Breeders' Cup Sprint horse, has never really, excelled as a stallion at siring horses that can run longer distances. What I'm interested in, Zoe, though, is the difference between the way So Happy ran in the San Felipe, in which he was soundly beaten by Potente, and how he ran in the Santa Anita Derby, where he soundly defeated Potente. The only thing I can figure out is the way he was ridden. In the Santa Anita, in the San Felipe, he was on the engine dueling for the lead, and in the Santa Anita Derby, Mike rode him a little more patiently and set him a little bit off the pace. That's the only thing I can figure out, but it was a much improved performance.
Much improved. And basically what happened was when Cherokee Nation didn't get out the gate, Potente did. So Potente was grabbed immediately by Robusta, who didn't give him a break the whole way around. I mean, JJ tried to get the first quarter as easy as he could. 23 was good, but then Haramir was breathing down his neck on Robusta. So had Cherokee Nation got out of the gate, it would have been Jaramillo on Robusta breathing down Cherokee Nation's neck. But it was Potente that took the brunt of it. So Happy was able to stay back there and lollygag. And I'll tell you one thing that was the biggest difference that I saw, because I was at Santa Anita. Watching So Happy in the paddock was a completely different horse. He lost the plot prior to the San Felipe. He was hot, he was sweaty, he was washy. He was a different horse. I watched him walking around the paddock for the Santa Anita Derby, and I'm like, wow, he looks like a different horse. He was cool, calm, and collected. And I don't know if Mark's been schooling him more, but he was a much more relaxed individual, and that certainly helped him in the running of the race. As far as Potente, he ran a very good race indeed, in my opinion. He just got hooked by Robusta, and he just never got a breather. He galloped out very well, and the team for Bob Baffert will move forward to the Derby as well with Potente. But no question that So Happy was best that day. He's out of a blame mare, so you're going to get a little bit of distance there. She only ran 3 times. She won her first 2 starts sprinting. She was actually trained by Christophe Clement. Her name was So Cunning. She tried going long once and didn't fare too well, but she was retired pretty much soon after that. So we'll see what So Happy can do. But thoughts are with the Glatt family, because we all know that Dina was watching down on Santa Anita Derby Day, and she had a big part to play in that. She was a fantastic person.
You got the Mark Glatt story. You've also got, obviously, the Mike Smith story. Smith would have been the oldest rider ever to have a mount in the Kentucky Derby. Last year, he was supposed to ride Rodriguez, the Wood Memorial winner, for Bob Baffert, but Rodriguez had to be scratched before the Derby. So Mike will now, for sure, definitely at 59, almost 60, will be the oldest rider, older than John Court, who was 58 when he rode Long Range Toddy, who got wiped out by Maximum Security in that scrum in the 2019 Kentucky Derby. And he's already the second oldest jockey to win the Kentucky Derby at 52, behind Shoemaker and Ferdinand, 54, when he won with Justify in 2018. So Mike's going to be another big story as well here.
In the Wood Memorial at the Big A, the winner was Albus. Congratulations to Riley Mott, a recent guest on the podcast, Gainesway Guest of the Week, who will now have 2 horses in the Kentucky Derby, and Albus, and of course, Incredibolt, who won the Virginia Derby. He came off a maiden win at Tampa Bay Downs. Iron Honor, the favorite for Chad Brown, ran 7th. Napoleon Solo didn't have a great day either. The Champagne winner ran 5th. And I'll throw this to you, Randy. You and Jerry Bailey were pretty tough on this race on NBC for good reason. But why don't you throw out those stats, those same stats that really sum up? And it's sad to me as a New Yorker, a guy who's, spent much of his career covering New York racing on a daily basis. Boy, this race is in trouble. It really is struggling. But Randy, you had some great stats in that. I'd love to hear them again.
I can't figure out why it's struggling so badly, unless the Arkansas Derby and the Louisiana Derby have really supplanted the Wood Memorial in terms of desirability among the owners and trainers. That's the only thing I can think of. But the last Wood winner to win the Kentucky Derby was 26 years ago, Fusaichi Pegasus. The last horse to come out of the Wood to win the Kentucky Derby was Funnyside, who was second to Empire Maker in 2003. Since 2003, only one horse coming out of the Wood Memorial has even hit the board in the Kentucky Derby. And that was a fluke. That was Tacitus, who actually crossed the wire fourth in Maximum Security's Kentucky Derby, but got elevated to third by DQ, or else the Wood would be completely shut out of 1, 2, 3 finishers in the Derby. So you pointed out this is the last Wood Memorial to be run at Aqueduct. I think that can only be a good thing, because it certainly can't get any worse in terms of, its status as a Kentucky Derby prep than the Wood has become lately. And there's one other thing I want to say. I have, for the last time, said on an NBC telecast, they won't run this horse in the Kentucky Derby. I didn't think that Pin Oak Stud, who already has Incredibolt, who looks like probably a better horse than Albus, would go ahead and run both horses. I thought, especially as bad as the Wood race was, 83 Beyer speed figure. The horse probably has zero chance. So I thought they would probably keep him, maybe run him in the Peter Pan, maybe run him in the Belmont, not run him in the Derby. But in their defense, I don't spend hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars on yearlings, hoping against hope that one of them can make it into the Kentucky Derby. And year after year after year, seeing my hopes go up in smoke, losing all this money. And now you finally have a chance to have not one, but two horses in the Kentucky Derby. I don't deal in those emotions like so many breeders and owners do. And I certainly can't hold it against them to want to run their horse in the Kentucky Derby, because that now more than ever before is like the goal of an owner, not just winning the Kentucky Derby, but just having a horse to be part of the Kentucky Derby experience.
And let's face it, you've pretty much already won if you get there. It's so hard to even get there. If you've got a slot in, they want to go. And we have, another connection with an angel on their shoulder because they lost Jim Bernhard last year as well. So all the more reason to try and keep his memory alive by running not one, but two horses in the Kentucky Derby. As far as the Wood Memorial goes, we'll have more to talk about it last year, courtesy of TD Thornton from a couple of weeks ago, who said that it's going to be a mile and eighth now. So if you think
one turn,
yeah, round one turn. If you thought the preps couldn't get any worse, wait till next year. Maybe it's going to be even worse because it's going to be around one turn. A lot of people will want to run two turns at this time of year.
At least we get some storylines out of it. Riley Mott, I think Chief Wallaby will make it into the Derby field, so he'll be competing against his dad, his first ever Derby, and he's got two horses in there. The second place horse, Right to Party, who's going to be 50-1 or higher. Chester Broman, 90 years old, coming back to the Derby for the first time since Friends Lake 22 years ago. His wife passed away a couple of years ago, Mary. So there's some good storylines at least coming out of the Wood Memorial, and that's
what number is Chief Wallaby?
Right now, he is second on the wait list. Okay. But the horse above him in 21 is Iron Honor, and they're leaning toward the Preakness, perhaps, he was seventh in the Wood Memorial after all. And there's a couple of horses, Otinho that you mentioned, that are in the main body of the field. Stark Contrast.
Does that include not the Europeans, but the other horses that were already in? Okay, good.
Yes, that includes those. And quick note before we go to break, Bill, I would love to take credit for the jockey scoop. That really comes from Jerry Bailey. Jerry called the agents and called the jockeys and asked them what was going on. Called them yesterday and asked them, and the trainers too, and asked them what was going on. So Jerry's clued in, obviously, to the jockey world, and he's the one that came up with all that info.
Well, we are recording this on Tuesday, and because I was wondering if, courtesy of Randy Moss or Jerry Bailey, I had a good scoop for the Thoroughbred Daily News. As you guys were commenting, I texted Brad Cox, said, "Do you have any updates on your jockey situation?" And he said no. So that's the party line, but Jerry Bailey is obviously on top of things. So we'll see what happens. Before we go to break, you were a little premature there. We want to talk about the Ashland, the only Grade 1 prep race for the Kentucky Oaks. And boy, I've been a big Zany fan all along. Percy's Bar was, what do you make of this filly? She hadn't run since the Breeders' Cup juvenile filly. She missed all the preps. Trainer Ben Colebrook got her ready, obviously, for the Ashland. She looked tremendous in there, winning by 2 1/4 lengths. I know she got a great triple on Mankato. The jockey cut the corner on the rail, saved some ground, whereas Zany went a little bit wide. Crazy pace in there, 24 and 3, 50 and 1, 115 and 1. But when I put out my Kentucky Oaks top 10 poll later in the week, I'm going to have Percy's Bar, Zoe, at number 1.
And she never looked like a loser. I'm sorry for the noise. I'm in the OBS Ocala Bets pavilion here at OBS during the break for the Breeze Show. So if you hear some screaming and yelling, it's because the 3 didn't win or the 4 didn't win or they're rooting for the 7. She was fabulous. Talking about Percy's Bar, and a great story with the naming as well. I remember Percy Poole. He was a bartender at Keeneland for decades. He's poured me many a Heineken. I can guarantee you that. And that was going back 20 years ago at Keeneland, because it's been a long time since I've actually been to the races at Keeneland. So this filly is named for Percy's Poole. Percy's Bar was a great meeting spot up on the second floor grandstand, and it still is. So we miss you, Percy. She was great. Never looked like a loser. She loves Keeneland, much like Further Ado. There's going to be a lot of talk of that. She got a perfect ride under Machado. She was DQ'd from her Alcibiades win last year, and this probably made up for it. I mean, what's better than 1 Grade 1, 2, but at least she got the 1. She looked great. As far as Zany is concerned, she'll get to go to the real wire next time. The first wire maybe caught her out. She was still a little bit green in the running, but Percy's Bar surely beat her on the square on Friday.
Yeah. I think Bill probably had Zany number 1 on the Oaks list. I thought Zany was probably a deserving number 1 for the Oaks. A lot of people felt so as well. Zany's stock drops a little bit. I wouldn't drop her stock as much as the margin of defeat would indicate. She ran a couple of lengths farther than Percy's Bar because Percy's Bar cut the corner and Zany was 2 to 3 wide around the 2 turns. Also, as you pointed out, the short stretch probably hurt Zany more than it hurt Percy's Bar. But one thing that you saw from Percy's Bar is that she seems to have much more of a turn of foot than Zany. Zany seems to be the grinder that just keeps coming and lugs in sometimes, and they got to straighten her out. It wasn't quite as bad in the Ashland. Where Percy's Bar just boom, when that hole opened up on the rail, I mean, she was through it and she was gone. And that sort of acceleration is what often wins races in big fields like the Kentucky Oaks. So that certainly would be an edge, I think, for Percy's Bar.
All right, we can't end the segment without my shedding a few tears for my dear Bookham Dano, who ran second in the Carter. He ran fine, but of course I'm disappointed. And afterwards, trainer Derek Ryan said he was 85%. And that's probably just trainer talk. You get those kind of things. He moves on now. Hopefully he's going to go on to the True North at Saratoga. But I tell you, there's another story in here. How about trainer Tim Kreiser, who wins this race with Point Doom, a horse he claimed off of Jamie Ness, of all people, for $40,000 at Penn National. Now he's a Grade 2 winner and beat my beloved Bookham Dano in the Carter. But Dano will be back to fight another day. So we'll see what the year has in store for him. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to have the Gainesway guest of the week, Nick Luck. He was so entertaining. We're going to have 2 segments with Nick Luck. Stay with us.
Do want to remind you that the TDN Writers Room is brought to you by Keeneland. Well, we are just wrapping up the major Derby preps, and there's a lot of movement on everybody's Derby dozen list. But one thing does not change. They are all loaded with Keeneland graduates. On TD Thornton's top 12, you could have bought any one of the top 6 at the 2024 Keeneland September sale. That includes Commandment, Renegade, Further ado, the Puma, Danone Bourbon, emerging market, and moreover, 8 of the top 12 are Keeneland graduates. Keeneland September, the World Yearling Sale is also the yearling sale for Kentucky Derby hopefuls. We'll be right back after this message from Keeneland.
We do this so your granddaughter can work on a farm someday. So the stands will still be packed in 50 years. That's why we come to work every day, obsess over every single detail. Because the story of racing is written one moment at a time. And the future of our industry deserves nothing less. Keeneland, every moment matters.
The fastest horse of the week brought to you by the Fast Sires at WinStar Farm. And this week, our spotlight will be on one of their new stallions for 2026, Straight No Chaser, a.k.a. Straight Up Fast. That's what WinStar likes to call him. For obvious reasons, after all, Straight No Chaser won the Breeders' Cup Sprint, got a 103 buyer for that. On the Preakness undercard, he won the Maryland Sprint, 107 for that one. And he won the Santa Anita Sprint Championship with a 103 buyer. He probably would have gotten a big buyer in Saudi Arabia as well, but we don't do buyers at King Abdulaziz Racecourse, where he won the Riyadh Dirt Sprint. That's some serious speed on the part of Straight No Chaser for a fee of only $10,000. Now, for the fastest horse of the week, she comes out of what I think is probably the deepest stakes race we've seen so far this year in any division in the United States. And that would be from the Madison Stakes, a grade 1 on Saturday on the Bluegrass Stakes undercard. What a deep field that was. And it was taken by Eclatant by about this much over a filly named, or a mare named Grand Job, a buyer speed figure for Eclatant, a career high 109 and a 108 for Grand Job. Eclatant, her form went south about a year ago in the spring. They gave her a lot of time off. She came back with an allowance win at Churchill Downs in February with a 104 buyer. That surprised Brad Cox, the trainer. He said, I don't know where that number came from. I have no idea what to make of that. Now he knows what to make of it. Eclatant is really on a roll right now, and the daughter of Into Mischief has never been better. Our fastest horse of the week. And now let's bring in our Gainesway guest of the week, racing broadcaster extraordinaire Nick Luck, coming to us from the UK. We're accustomed to telling our guests, it's almost a cliche by now, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us. In Nick's case, we're talking about a man who has Luck on Sunday, the Nick Luck Daily podcast. Still don't know how in the hell he pulls that one off. In addition to his U.S. and his UK broadcast appearances, he's a racing representative of sorts around the world, hosting post-position draws, news conferences. In other words, Nick, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us.
I know, disgracefully. And by the way, it's lovely to be on this podcast with two of my favorite people. But disgracefully, I am actually taking a few minutes out of a family vacation. But I don't want you to feel in any way guilty. I bring it on myself. I'm very happy to do it.
So I'm guessing the big majority of our viewers and listeners are familiar with you primarily from your outstanding work over the years with NBC Sports. But just to get a full understanding of Nick Luck, Inc., give us an idea of all the different locales that your racing job has taken you to over the last few years.
Oh, it's almost embarrassing to call it Nick Luck Inc. because I'm not sure that's the way it's set out. You set out, don't you, just to try and do a decent job on the telly, and then things change and things evolve. And working with you at NBC and before that at ESPN gave me a great exposure in the US, and that kind of begat lots of other things, I suppose. So you then become known as being more international than just confined to your local region or country, and that's been a massive privilege, really, especially over the last decade. So this year, 2026 alone, I've been to Magic Millions at the Gold Coast, and then I came to Miami to be with you for a couple of weeks to do the Pegasus, and then we did the Holy Bull show together, and then I came home and did some work here, and then I went to Riyadh to do the Saudi Cup. I may have had a Bahrain trip chucked in there at some point in the middle of that. I can't even remember. And then maybe we went to Ireland for a little bit, came back to the UK. And then we had Cheltenham, the Cheltenham Festival. And then I was in Hong Kong for their Hong Kong Derby. And then I came back, and then I went to Dubai for the World Cup. And then we just about got to the end of March. And then after that, I had a little bit of time away. And then it was Grand National time. And then next week, I'll be off to Hong Kong again. And then I'll be seeing you at Derby. So
no
that's pretty
Singapore?
much how it's been so far.
No Singapore?
They shut down racing in Singapore before I could even get there. They all say it was all quite entertaining when Cranji was going strong, but no, what a shame that was.
So, Nick, how do you manage to fit this all in and still have a family life? You mentioned you're having a couple of days away with your family, but you do have a wife, a lovely wife, Laura. You have 3 children. How do you juggle it? Does it make the marriage stronger being away? How can you be a dad, a husband, and everything else, along with the myriad of 16 jobs across about 3 different continents?
I hope the absence makes the heart grow fonder rather than just Laura thinking, "Oh my God, he's away again" when something goes wrong. I have an uncanny knack of being abroad with any passing catastrophe, but ratio wise, it's probably not that surprising given the fact that last year I think it was stretching to about 180 days. But no, the girls are great; they're so understanding, and I think they appreciate that if you enjoy what you do, then the likelihood of you being in better humor when you actually do walk in the door is probably significantly higher. So I think that's a big plus and a big tick. I'm lucky in that respect. There isn't a day when I wake up when I think I really don't want to do this, or I don't want to do this job. Yeah, the podcast can be quite challenging. And the odd time you have a slow news day, but it's amazing how much happens in this sport around the world. This week I've been away for a few days, so I haven't actually been doing my own podcast this week for the last 4 or 5 days. And I thought it'd be fine, it'd be quiet. There's nothing that significant happening. I've just chosen a nice little week where, Josh and Charlotte, who are doing it for me, can just tip away and nothing bad's going to hit the fan. And just suddenly everything happened. And racing's like that. It just pervades news like nothing else.
So let's go biographical here. All right. How did your interest in horse racing first begin and then develop over the years?
It definitely began through my parents. I mean, they had a love of horses, a real interest in the sport. My mother particularly. My mother was a good horsewoman, good eventer, show jumper. She rode in some pointer points. She trained a bit, did a bit of everything really. She was kind of a horsey Swiss Army knife. And then she met my dad, who didn't really have much of an interest in racing. And then he kind of developed an interest in riding through her. And then they decided, I think, with my dad's parents in the early 70s, that they might be interested in having a couple of steeplechase horses. And they met a trainer that Zoe will remember pretty well called Josh Gifford, who'd been a multiple champion jockey. And they became great friends. They were all in their probably early 30s, having the time of their lives, young families. And they had a couple of horses who did well. And it got to 78. I was born, and Josh was my godfather. And so I think when it got to sort of 7 or 8, we grew up around ponies and riding, and there were always horses around. And I would just follow his horses avidly. And he was doing well at the time. He was the first jumps trainer in England to have 100 horses in his stable. Actually, probably one of the first trainers of any description to have 100 horses. In those days, it wasn't that common. And so he'd be having winners on the TV every weekend, and I'd follow the horses avidly. So I'd write out lists and stats and odds and jockeys and charts and this and that. So I sort of combined a kind of love of the sport with that slightly, intense, geeky thing that most of us racing fans have that kind of satisfies that side of our brain. So I always loved the cerebral side of it as well as the horsey side of it. And then I think as I went through my teens, I got more interested in the mainstream branch of the sport. So I would just watch all the time. And then, unlike most of the rest of my family, I was always into the flat racing. I got into the pedigrees. And then I spent my bit of time in Kentucky when I left high school at 18 before I came back to England to go to university. So that really got me sort of a bit more globalized, working for Joe Pagan at Kentucky Equine Research. I guess had it not been for that little period of time, I'm not sure the rest would have followed. How
was it working at Keep with Joe Pagan?
Oh, brilliant.
What were your first thoughts on Kentucky when you got there, coming from London, England?
Cold. I arrived in the fall in an ice storm.
Oh God!
And I was 18 and I looked about 12, and I couldn't drive and I wasn't allowed to drink, and I was put up with a very, very sweet man, Tom Peavy, in 143 Highview Drive, Versailles, Kentucky. And he looked after me brilliantly with his two dogs, an old corgi and a beagle, and me and Tom. And I did my best. And I didn't know that many people, but after 6 or 7 months, I didn't really, didn't want to come home. I loved it. So it was an education. It taught me how to write. It taught me how to meet deadlines. It taught me not to expect too much, but to keep working hard. And then I spent 5 years at university forgetting all that before I started back again.
What did you study in university? Didn't you do some acting? Didn't you want to get on the stage? I
was all through school and all through my my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. I was doing quite a lot of acting. I mean, I met Laura doing plays at uni. And did I actually want to do it professionally? I definitely think there was probably an 18-month period where I thought quite seriously about it, but I'd stretched out education for long enough by that point, and I thought, I've got. I don't think I've ever said this before, but my parents split up when I was 19 or 20, and I'd been at university about a term. And I think that kind of enabled me to get away with quite a lot for the next few years, and probably without the kind of close scrutiny that you might normally have at that point in your life. So whilst I did emerge with a couple of degrees, I probably could have just kept stringing it out as long as I wanted. But then I did sort of have a moment of realization that I probably ought to go and get some gainful employment. So, and also but by luck or whatever, by happenstance, I had acted with people who went on to have like really illustrious careers. And I think I was kind of disabused of the notion that I was any good or relative to them fairly early on, really. So, yeah. So I ended up here.
I can totally picture you on stage in a play. I've been trying to picture you since you're on holiday with the kids, plummeting down a steep vertical water slide, down to a treacherous ending. And now I'm picturing you when you tell us about your upbringing on horseback. So you'd be perfectly comfortable, maybe not on a racy thoroughbred, but on the back of a horse.
I would be perfectly comfortable. I mean, I was rubbish, really. As a rider. I mean, my mum was pretty talented. My brother rides every day and he's pretty good. He's just, funnily enough, he trained his first point-to-point winner last weekend, which was a bit of a kick. He just decided to train a couple of horses, and he'd had 5 seconds, I think, from 14 runners. So he was waiting for the first winner. So he came. So he was very excited. That was nice. He was always a better rider than I was. So, but the odd time I get on a horse, I still enjoy it. As long as they're sufficiently unfit. I remember we did an open in Saudi Arabia about 3 years ago with Michelle, and obviously she's a very accomplished and is as brave as a lion, and would probably get on just about any horse that was given to her. And they said, "Oh no, very, very quiet." These two Arabian horses arrived by trailer in the middle of these sand dunes. I promise you, in the middle of nowhere in the desert. It's about 100 degrees. And they said, "Oh, no, we give them a bit of something to keep them quiet. They'll be absolutely fine." Well, anyway, they pulled the back down of this trailer, and they came out trumpeting. I thought, oh my God, I'm not getting on that. I'm not getting on that. Anyway, Michelle straight on. I think Katie, one of our assistant producers or producers, gets on the other one. She's a kind of handy horsewoman. Anyway, this thing's an absolute lunatic for about an hour, and she'd ridden it in 110 degree heat for about an hour, by which point she got off it, and it's like... I said, "That's fine, I'll get on now."
Thank you very much.
So I hopped on, it was fine. We did the opener, we filmed the opener as like Lawrence of Arabia, and sort of, long flowing linen shirt coming over the sand dune. And of course, then I couldn't get the thing out of first gear. And I'm there thinking, here we are in Riyadh. Yeah.
I heard all about that from Michelle. So I'm an avid listener to the Nick Luck Daily. It keeps me informed on pretty much everything that's going on in Europe, which means that I don't have to read a gazillion publications, which is great. But how did it come about? I know it came about during COVID. And were you surprised how well received it's been? Because it's fabulous.
You're very kind. And like all these things, it was sort of, it was one of those where you just have to do one and see what happens. So I've been thinking about it. Actually, I had the idea in 2019, and I remember Brittany and I were sort of thinking about trying to do something international with Jason Richardson in Australia, and it kind of got to first base, but it didn't really get any further. And then I thought, well, could I do something daily, like a daily news service? And it could be 10 or 15 minutes, and it could just be very short and, very straightforward. A bit like New Statesman, Spectator, Times, Redbox, all those sort of things we're doing here for news and politics. And there wasn't really a racing service like that. So I thought, well, maybe I could do it, and maybe I'd need a bit of sponsorship to get it going. And then it got to the sort of 4th month of lockdown, when actually you were struggling for stuff to do and wanted to keep the wool from the door. And Laura just said to me, just get on and do it. You keep talking about it. Just do it. Just record an episode. So that literally I just did one day on the 1st of July, 2020. I recorded episode 1. And I think today we recorded episode 1,490 something or other. So wow. You can't, and then I couldn't stop. Like once the ball was rolling, I couldn't very well stop. And then, it sort of picked up, and it ended up being, the episodes ended up being half an hour, 45 minutes, and taking in an awful lot of content from around the world, which I really enjoyed. And I think without doing that, it's probably led to a lot of opportunities I wouldn't otherwise have had. I'm especially especially I think in Australia and in Hong Kong as well.
Right. I must say, I particularly enjoy your banter with Matt Chapman.
Yeah, Matt's come on board like relatively recently, I suppose. But yeah, he's all my regular guests, so all my regular plus ones are all very, very different. Some of them have a really hard news background, some don't. They're from all different parts of England and Ireland, and sometimes from further afield as well. So I think hopefully they all have a slightly different constituency, so they will appeal to a slightly different group of people.
The TDN Writers Room, brought to you by our friends at the PHBA, the Pennsylvania Horse Breeders Association. We are right in the heart of breeding season, and if you're a breeder, you probably know this. If you don't, you certainly should, that Pennsylvania is a place you should seriously consider to own and breed in 2026. And here's why. If you breed to a Pennsylvania stallion, you're eligible for 40% in breeders awards and up to 40% in owners bonuses. You're also eligible for those lucrative 2026 Pennsylvania sired, Pennsylvania bred stallion stakes. So how much money are we actually talking about here? Over the last 13 years, the PHBA Breeding Fund distributed an average of $27.5 million in awards, owner bonuses, and restricted race purses. So if you'd like to collect some of this booty, you want more information on the PA Bred program, just visit pabred.com or call Brian Sanfratello at 610-444-1050.
The Pennsylvania Breeding Program is the best program in the country. The Stallion Awards, the owner bonuses, also the restricted races and the stakes races for Pennsylvania breds. Last year, 321 Pennsylvania breeders earned Breeders' Awards. 22 Pennsylvania breeders earned over $100,000. We have the best program in the country. Take advantage of the fantastic program that we have.
Learn more at pabred.com.
On this week's edition of First Things First, our own Michelle Yu caught up with Mark Glatt, the winning trainer of So Happy.
I'm joined right now by Mark Glatt. Mark, we know it's been a rough 2026, losing your wife, Dina. I know your family is here supporting you, and all of Santa Anita has been here supporting you. What does this moment feel like right now?
It's pretty hard to describe. We have had an overwhelming amount of support, and it's helped us get through this very, very tough time. She got that horse there today. And I'm just so thankful to the owners for giving me an opportunity. They are big contributors to my stable. They're not really owners. They've become lifelong friends. And just really appreciate their friendship. Since Dina's passing, they've called me every night. They've flown out here. They've just been tremendous, amongst a lot of other people. But they truly are friends, and I couldn't ask it to happen for better people.
I saw your family here on site too. At least 2 of your kids came by. What was it like celebrating this with them?
It's a Santa Anita Derby. I mean, if you can't get excited about that, but obviously there's a little more meaning to it, given the recency of our lives. And I'm just glad to have them here and enjoy the win with everyone.
We're so happy for you, Mark. Congratulations here from everybody. We love you.
Thank you. I love everybody else too.
Great to hear from Mark. Certainly tough times with the loss of his wife, Dina, and our thoughts are with him every step of the way. So happy, looked really, really good winning the Santa Anita Derby. All right, let's talk about Santa Anita. We're on a little bit of a break right now, but we'll be back with a 3-day weekend on Friday, April the 17th. We'll see you then.
I think I know which direction you would go with this, but how do you view the differences in broadcasting horse racing in the U.S. as opposed to doing it in the U.K.?
Yeah, I mean, you're the person I broadcast horse racing with the longest in the US. And actually, probably full stop, come to think of it. I'm not sure I've been with anyone else since 2003.
Shall I leave the room?
I know. It's sweet, isn't it? He's a bit of a legend, so he isn't he, to be fair.
It's been a long time.
He's a bit of a legend. It's
much more free-flowing in the UK, I would suspect.
Looser, yes. I would say. Looser, yeah. More stuff gets done on the hoof. It is a little bit looser. I think, particularly on a network show in the US, there is more formatting. You have to be more timely, a little more on point. As Amy Zimmerman is her great line is that I never saw a red light that I didn't run. But hopefully I'm getting better after 20 whatever years. I'm maybe improving slightly. And I'm very grateful for the latitude that you all give me. But yeah, being taught brevity and precision and being able to ask a question rather than just, deliver a statement, I think is something that that high level American television is always going to teach you. And, being a part of a show like the Kentucky Derby is, I think, always going to be my biggest adrenaline rush and my biggest thrill, because your margin for error is so much less and the sense of occasion is so much greater.
What's your favorite thing to do? I mean, you're on the desk, you're running around. Like, if you could pick one favorite thing to do, what would it be?
That is a good question. I suppose everyone who has done all those things habitually says they want to host the show because they want to be the kind of, person directing the traffic. And it's your kind of overarching ambition when you're younger. And I got that opportunity quite early on in my broadcasting life. So to an extent, that would always have been the kind of default answer. And I got to host Channel 4 when it had the network coverage for several years and do the Grand National and Cheltenham and Ascot and so forth. But I think as time's gone on, I appreciate the mechanics of that reporting role a bit more and what you can do with it. Yeah. And certainly with NBC, I hosted a show with Randy and Jerry the other day and we had great fun on the desk, and I would do that anytime they asked and be very happy to do it. And, of course everybody wants to do that, but doing the walkover at the Derby or doing those paddock walkabouts on the hoof or, or especially when something that really isn't planned occurs, or when something goes awry, or when something goes wrong, or it all hits the fan.
A tea party at Pimlico?
Yeah, well, all that stuff. But when your instinct has to take over, and it's not to, and it's something you can't plan. That's probably where I think that I've done some of my better stuff.
You've been a part, obviously, of the cream of the crop of racing telecasts, racing events in the United States on a regular day-to-day basis. Do you think horse racing is more of a mainstream sport in the UK than it is in the US? What's your sense there? Yeah,
I think so. And I think more to the point, it's probably even more of a mainstream sport, say, in Australia than it is in the UK. If you're talking about proximity to national psyche, it's probably, you kind of have to bet without Hong Kong, don't you? Because Hong Kong's a little bit different, But in terms of proximity to national psyche, it's probably Japan, Australia, Ireland, UK, France, America. Well, Ireland, UK, America, France. Well, that kind of order, isn't it?
Yeah. And I know on your podcast, you deal with a lot of the current issues in the sport. Unfortunately, Zoe and I on this podcast have to constantly deal with things like, the CAW thing, the shrinking foal crop in the United States, HISA versus CDI. What do you see as the biggest challenges in the UK? Are there any similarities there?
Oh, huge challenges. Yeah. I mean, the funding and fixtures is the biggest challenge. How the sport really sees itself moving forward. Is it a sport that is going to excel by, trying to burnish its biggest assets and hope that it can survive top down, so that you're really throwing everything into your big festivals, your top festivals, and that you're not, you're relying on those as major commercial events, and you drive all the money into that, and then their commercial success will trickle down to the grassroots and enable the grassroots to succeed. That the sort of Premier League football argument, and the breakaway Premier League, but the offshoot, the commensurate benefits of that will then permeate down through the lower leagues. Or do you exist with the funding model that you currently have, which is effectively about volume and about how much revenue you get from selling each race as a streaming product, as a wagering product? And is that actually what should be sustaining the sport? And it's trying to find that balance. And I think that philosophical argument has never been more intense now in British racing, because the departure of the not very long-standing British Horse Racing Authority chairman, Lord Allen, who came in to try and shake things up and commercialise the central body of the sport, has meant that there's been a fair bit of bloodletting, and that might be productive, because it looks as though the larger racecourses, the larger independent racecourses like Ascot, Goodwood, Newbury, York, and as well as the Jockey Club, which is obviously a group of fairly significant racecourses, are trying to change the status quo and trying to say that actually this should be a sport that is about quality, about the customer, about making the big events even better, and try and compete on an international stage, rather than, somebody said the other day, pilot high, sell it cheap. But the truth of it is the broad base of the product underneath that, it's kind of pilot high and sell it probably a bit more expensively than it's actually worth, until somebody realizes it's too expensive.
Nick, we've got a massive shake-up going on over here, and you will have heard the news about FanDuel slowly winding down. A lot of our friends, a lot of our colleagues are going to be out of work. What are your thoughts on the FanDuel situation and what it could generally mean to US racing? Because it's not good, in my opinion.
Well, somebody wrote that it was probably a very difficult decision to wind down FanDuel TV production. And I thought the sad truth of it is that for somebody, it probably wasn't a very difficult decision.
Right.
And that it was a decision that was made all too easily with the stroke of a pen. Because it's not as though you and I were sitting, Zoe, whenever we last saw each other 3 or 4 months ago, it's not like you and I were sitting having a drink going, sure, FanDuel's in trouble, isn't it? That won't be here in a year.
Yeah.
I mean, could we have
Never.
foreseen that? I don't think so. Normally with these things, we've got a pretty good idea. We can feel it in our bones. We can see the way the wind's blowing. I don't think anybody thought that would happen as soon as it did, even when Flutter's share price was tanking and tanking and tanking and tanking. And that's the root of it. If that weren't the case, then this wouldn't have happened. But the company is so huge, and FanDuel is a small part of it, and horse racing within FanDuel is an even smaller part of that. And somebody's looked at a balance sheet and gone, "Oh, this production's quite expensive relative to what we're getting out of this. Our share price is doing this." It's a stroke of a pen job, isn't it?
Yeah.
For somebody. And I'm not saying that person's a bad person, but that is what they're paid to do. But they're not appreciating the wider consequences of that. And to what extent has the sport, failed to realize that being a tiny part of an entity like that is not a very secure place to be.
Yeah.
Well, if I haven't said this, thanks for taking the time out of your family vacation, out of your holiday to be with us. I'm like the odd person out here. I'm the only one not speaking King's English. So since I've got you here, let me give you a word and tell me how you would pronounce it. All right. P-U-M-A.
Puma.
Puma.
Thank you, Nick.
Zoe, thanks you very much for that, Nick.
I kept telling Randy, he keeps saying Puma. I'm like, Randy, there's no poo in Puma.
Puma.
The Puma. I'm like, it's Puma.
All right. Now that we've solved that one, Nick, we'll see you at Churchill Downs.
See you at Churchill.
Thanks,
all right,
Nick.
take care. Thank you.
Guys. Take care.
Our guest of the week, the Honorable Nick Luck, sponsored by Gainesway, the home to Muth, who is standing his second year at the farm. Breeders all over the Bluegrass are now welcoming the first foals of Muth, and if they look anything like their dad, those breeders are going to be pretty happy. Muth, after all, was a $2 million sales topper himself at OBS. He was a TDN Rising Star in his career debut and was the only stallion to retire in 2025 to win a Grade 1 stakes as a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, just like, incidentally, his sire, Good Magic. Muth stands at Gainesway for a fee of $30,000.
Say hello to Muth.
The single most important factor in predicting sire success is those who have consistent, high-class form, and it's even enhanced if they have that form as 2-year-olds as well. By our calculations, Muth has the #1 chance of sire success of any of the 30 or so sires that retired to Kentucky in 2025. He has the credentials that we're looking for when we predict sire success.
With some of the fullest fields in the country and quality racing year-round, there's never been a better time to reap the rewards of breeding and racing in Kentucky. Purse money in Kentucky is at an all-time high, as is average purse per race, outpacing California, Florida, and New York. Kentucky breds. Breed them. Raise them, race them. We all win.
On a past TDN Writers Room podcast, we discussed in detail the Dubai World Cup, Magnitude's victory over Forever Young. We didn't tackle it from this angle, though. Kentucky breds. Magnitude, a Kentucky bred, taking down that $12 million purse. The Dubai Golden Shaheen. Remember, Ben Tornado was upset in that race by Dark Saffron. Dark Saffron is a Kentucky bred. And the Godolphin Mile went to Banishing, who is also a Kentucky bred. There's a trifecta for you at Maidan. And extra congratulations to the breeders of Magnitude on earning a Kentucky Thoroughbred Breeders Incentive Fund award of $7,500. And, of course, for breeding an international Grade 1 winner. Kentucky breds, breed them, raise them, race them, especially in Dubai. We all win.
Well, it seems like you have to be a lawyer to cover horse racing these days, or at least have a law degree. And thank goodness T.D. Thornton at the Thoroughbred Daily News takes care of all these sort of stories because they give me a headache, to be honest with you. But the latest was Churchill Downs won a round in court in its ongoing dispute with HISA, where a judge rules that the assessment fee should not be based on purse weight methodology, called that arbitrary and capricious and therefore unlawful. And that going forward, starts will be based on the fees will be based on starts based. These two companies also don't like each other very much, which is very evident. In one of the first go-rounds, HISA accused Churchill Downs of freeloading. Now Churchill has come back and said that this is indicative of HISA's ongoing fiscal management. Randy, the last time we talked about that, I was impressed of your grasp of the situation. So I will go to you first. And what do you make of all this, other than the fact that it looks like a big victory for Churchill Downs?
Well, my first question would be, what impressed you about my grasp of the situation?
Because I totally don't understand this stuff, and you understand it a little bit better than I do.
Like I do. It's not a surprise that Churchill wins in court when you see the way the rule was written, the way the HISA regulations were written to begin with, which I didn't know. It came out after the fact. And when I read those about how the assessments were supposed to be made in the HISA mandate, then you kind of say, oh, well, okay, I can see why a judge might rule that way. Now a couple of interesting things. What happens is, I think you pointed this out last week. One of you did, Zoe. I think you might have. All these tracks that paid their dues based on the framework that's now been declared invalid. I mean, now do they go back and say, okay, we need a credit, or we need to readjust ourselves? That certainly wouldn't be good for HISA. So I wonder what's going on in that regard. But no, and it's also, obviously, I'm not suggesting in any way that Churchill Downs didn't win the case on merits, but it's certainly not surprising to see a Kentucky court, as we've seen, rule in favor of Churchill Downs. So there.
It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that Churchill Downs wins a court case. They must have a docket of lawyers on their payroll. When it comes to lawyer-like things, Churchill Downs has it all. If they're making a case for something, you can guarantee they're pretty sure they're going to win. So not surprised at all, and I wouldn't be surprised to see other racetracks come after HISA and say, hey, how about we get some money back here? We already paid, where's the payback? Or we're not going to pay this quarter because we paid too much last quarter. I don't know. It's still going to be a mess.
Yeah, I've said this before. I said it a few weeks ago. We've talked about this topic a lot, I guess. I don't think starts-based fees are really entirely fair either.
No, they're not. It should be what kind of money you're throwing around. You've got these little tracks that run 10-horse fields all the time. Yeah. For them, they're going to be paying as much as Churchill Downs. That's not fair.
I don't think it's fair either. And I think I said before, I think it should be based in part on starts, but also modified by the handle that these races generate, per race handle. And that way you're not asking a small time racetrack who does a good job in field size to pay as much as a major racetrack like Churchill Downs. But you know that Churchill Downs would be against that. Naira would be against that. The big dogs out there who don't really, I don't want to sound harsh, but don't really care that much about, they're worried about their bottom line and their stock prices, and rightfully so. They're not going to care that it penalizes a little guy. They're going to do what's best for their bottom line. That's what they're going to be in favor of.
So moving on to other news off track. And normally I don't write about this for Thoroughbred Daily News. They put out these, Equibase puts out these economic indicators. But I had to pick up on the story for the first quarter of 2026. Handle was down by 12.35%. In March. That's the worst month that the sport has had since December of 2024 when you're talking about the percentage of decline in handle. Now, to be fair, there were 5 Saturdays in March 2025 and 4 in March 2026. That is a big factor because people obviously bet more on Saturdays than they do on a Thursday afternoon. But more alarming, handle is down 7.11% on the year. Some TDN readers commented on the story saying that, well, this had to do a lot with all the bad weather in the Northeast. Well, that's not really true. I mean, I get to a point, maybe it's true, but the number of races run in the country was down only 3.22%. And, you know, it's an ongoing trend. There's no reversals, but when you see the 1 or 2% declines, you don't get that alarmed. But when you see that it's down by 7% for the first 3 months, I think that is a cause for alarm. And I'm going to say the same thing that I've probably said 150 times on this show, Randy. I think we're seeing the effects of CAW wagering and that they're driving players out of the game. I really think that's what this is all about.
Could be. Could have. I wouldn't argue with that at all. I also think it might be in part due to the overall U.S. economy and concerns about, you know, gasoline prices and inflation and, you know, the war in Iran and all this other stuff that, you know, that's causing prices to surge in the United States. And maybe some people are retrenching a little bit on their, you know, their entertainment dollars that they're spending on betting on the horse races. That might be a part of it also. I don't know. It's concerning.
Well, let's hope that the trend does not continue and that we have some better news. So last week on the show, we read some comments from listeners / viewers that posted on YouTube. And that was a lot of fun. And as a matter of fact, it seemed to pick up because we got some more comments this week. And we encourage people, this is, if our people that are tuning into the podcast will continue to do this, I think we'll make it a regular feature of the show. The easiest way to do it is watch the podcast on YouTube. Then you could put comments down underneath there. So we got some interesting ones. And Randy, I'll throw the first one to you. There's a couple for you, by the way. But this is from Free Speech 11. And since you're a TV guy, I want to throw this out to you. And of course, Zoe, feel free to comment as well. Is YouTube a viable platform to broadcast live horse racing? And of course, this issue comes up with what we talked about last week with them essentially pulling the plug on FanDuel. Is YouTube an option?
As much time as I spend on YouTube, I would love to see live Thoroughbred Racing show up on YouTube. Look, I mean, more and more people are now using YouTube as their TV purveyor of choice. YouTube TV, YouTube television. It's huge right now. So yeah, I think given the way broadcast in general is transitioning nowadays, YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, you know, if there is a desire among any of those companies to televise horse racing, I think it would be a fantastic option, or maybe a less expensive option for someone to put horse racing on YouTube. Right?
And we already have America's Day at the Races. I don't have terrestrial TV, so I can watch America's Day at the Races on YouTube. That whole show is on there. So we already have that, which is going to be fantastic moving forward now that we've lost FanDuel. Delighted to see that Todd Schrupp picked up a role America's Day at the Races. And that was very smart of them because Todd has a very big following. So he's going to take a lot of that TVG money over to Naira for Naira Bets with their America's Day at the Races. I believe he's signed up for pretty much all summer long. He starts, I believe, this week on Thursday on America's Day at the Races.
A 2-week run. Yeah.
I know some of the guys at FanDuel were saying, oh, they did him a favor, because he was the first one out the door, so he got hired straight away. So Todd's come up smelling like roses. And I love Todd.
One of the real nice guys. One of the
Yes,
real
good
nice
for him.
guys out there.
It's also worth noting, and I did a story in the TDN last week that look like they didn't make any specific commitments, but the New York Racing Association / Fox said they're very aware of the FanDuel situation and that they are looking into it. I don't think they're ever going to be what FanDuel was. I don't think they're going to show the fourth race from Mahoning Valley on a Tuesday afternoon, but they are very interested in increasing their racing coverage through their America's Day at the Races platform. Okay, so this goes on. This is a question from Billy Kane /X5U. And I think Billy Kane makes a good point that why hasn't anyone mentioned RTN Racetrack Television? Says, I've been a subscriber for years, and they have of all the thoroughbred tracks, live racing worldwide, except the Oaks and the Derby, the rest of the year. Whatever track you wish to watch, you receive the track's feed. And he makes a good point. I believe you have to pay a fee. I meant to look that up, but that's not free, whereas FanDuel was. I don't think it's a prohibitive cost. But I would say, yeah, that's a good option. But I would say I don't believe, and someone correct me, as I'm not a subscriber, that they don't have any commentary. I think they're just the racetrack feeds. So that again is not going to be something that's going to really fill the void left by, the real talented people that work for FanDuel commenting on the races. But yeah, Zoe, I mean, maybe I should get a racetrack television subscription. It sounds like a great option.
RTN is great. You never miss a race. You never miss a race, but you do have to pay. But you will get every track other than Derby and Oaks because Randy hogs all that on NBC.
I was a subscriber to the original racereplays.com, and then I transitioned over to RTN. It's all done by Todd Roberts and his company in Las Vegas. And the great thing about RTN is you can get America's Day at the Races. You can get the live feed of America's Day at the Races as well as just the simulcast feeds from each racetrack. And you can go international to everywhere. I mean, all these little tracks in Australia that you've never heard of. And you can watch their simulcast feeds. You can watch all their races. Royal Ascot, you can go. You can see races anywhere. So to me, and it's not free. It depends on how much you want to subscribe to. But it's a great source for me to keep up with racing around the world.
So this is a question from Daniel Moretti, and he said, maybe Mike Rapoli can take over FanDuel's infrastructure and create a new channel? And Daniel, in all due respect, no, that's not going to happen. And here's why. Mike Rapoli's heart is in the right place, but people forget he's a businessman. Not only is he a businessman, he's one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the history of the world, literally, with a guy starting from scratch and becoming a billionaire. I don't think in a million years he would ever do this because it's a money-losing proposition. And this is the reason why the FanDuel is not going to be FanDuel TV very soon in the future. Mike is not in the business of taking over businesses that probably, even with his business savvy, really have no chance of making money. So I think sometimes we ask too much of Mike Rapoli. I mean, he's got this bluster and he calls himself the savior and the commissioner and all that. But at the end of the day, he's a smart guy, and I don't see him doing this now. Okay. Everybody else.
No. I got something to say. I was going to let Zoe go first.
Oh, he's not going to lose money. I can't see him losing money. You hit the nail on the head. He would be buying a racetrack first rather than starting a TV station.
You think too many people view Mike Rapoli as the savior? Jeez. It's unbelievable. Gulfstream's going out of it. Call Mike Rapoli. Hialeah. Call Mike Rapoli. He'll buy Hialeah. We need more drones. Call Mike Rapoli. I mean, more ships. Mike Rapoli can build a shipyard. I mean, come on. I mean, yeah, I'm a fan of the way he's shaking the tree, so to speak. I think it's probably a tree that has a lot of dead branches on it that needs to be shaken in the industry. And I like the way he's trying to hold people and companies in the sport, organizations in the sport accountable. I think it's a good thing, but he can't be viewed as the answer to every single thing that's going on in thoroughbred racing. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, you guys couldn't be more right about that. Like you said, I save Hawthorne. How about that? There's another one.
Call Mike Rapoli.
Yeah, we'll call Mike Rapoli, and he'll get that. He'll get that mess straightened out. Okay, so this is specifically for Randy. It's from Ron Birch 0901. Randy, do you believe in dosage numbers? Commandment has a 7 and the Puma's 4.60. Can they get the 1.25 mile Derby distance? Boy, we haven't heard much about dosage numbers in a long time, but Ron Birch wants to know if okay. All right.
It's upside down, backwards.
I guess that's your answer then, huh?
Yeah. My answer is an emphatic no.
Okay.
When you have a system that is constantly year after year adjusted and changed to make it viable, no, you can't. You can't do that. I mean, no, this horse doesn't fit dosage next year. Oh, he did fit dosage after all. I can't go for that.
All right. Hey, Zoe, there was a comment from Holly Retzer. Did you see that one as well?
Not sure.
All right. I was throwing to you that's the one who said the nice thing about me.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Being the
Bill
flaming
Finley
left wing.
is the voice of reason. I love that.
That.
The voice of reason. We're just going to put that on your tombstone one of these days. The voice of reason, Mr. Bill Finley. And he is. He is. Who doesn't love Bill Finley?
All right. And we thank Aunt Holly for writing in to the YouTube message board for us. But hey, again, this has been a lot of fun. Keep those messages and those comments coming, and we will do our very best to as long as they're nice and polite. One guy wasn't so nice, and that's why we didn't read from him. But
that's where I was starting to go, Bill. I'm sorry.
What's that?
Are you on the left of the screen?
I'm sorry.
Are you on the left of the screen or the right of the screen, Bill? Which side of the screen are you sitting on?
When it comes to horse racing and politics, I got nothing to say. Absolutely nothing. Okay. All right.
You know who you are. The TDN Writers Room is also brought to you by First TV. It is time for the work of the week, and we're talking Pavlovian, who has earned 70 points towards the Kentucky Derby, making him 11th on the list. He's keeping fit for his run on the first Saturday of May. The Doug O'Neill trainee won the Sunland Park Derby before finishing second by a nose on the March 21st Louisiana Derby. Worked a half mile this past Easter Sunday in 49 flat. He was solo that day under Edwin Maldonado. With 10 starts under his belt, he'll be one of the most experienced horses in the Kentucky Derby field. We'll be right back after this message from First TV.
Be a smarter better with First TV. The best horses. With thousands of exclusive morning workouts. All at your fingertips and delivered right into your inbox. Everything you need to be informed. Be smart. Bet smart. With First TV. All the thrills. Fraction of the bills. Experience the power of the partnership. Change your life, make new friends, and compete at the highest level of thoroughbred racing. West Point Thoroughbreds, the gold standard in racing partnerships. Visit westpointtb.com.
TDN Writers Room also brought to you by West Point Thoroughbreds. The work is never over for West Point Thoroughbreds. They've always got to be looking for their next stars, and right now they're on the prowl. They've got their bloodstock agent David Ngordo and his assistant Casey Klein and the whole team in Ocala for next week's OBS spring sale for 2-year-olds in training. After all, last year at the April OBS sale, the team secured Counting Stars for $150,000 to run in the West Point Black and Gold. She'll be among the favorites for the Kentucky Oaks. And in 2023, they landed multiple Grade 1 winner Carson's Run for only $170,000. West Point's 5 newcomers from OBS March are now fully subscribed. You can get all the details on the April editions to come by logging on to www.westpointtb.com.
I guess that's a wrap on this week's show. We had a lot of fun. I want to thank our Gainesway guest of the week, Nick Luck. I want to thank my partners, Randy Moss and Zoe Cabman. And as I say each and every week, and I mean it with all sincerity, this show would not look as wonderful and sound as good as it does if it weren't for the people who work so hard behind the scenes, That's Sue Finley, Katie Petruniak, Anthony LaRocca, and Aaliyah LaRocca. We'll be back next week. Lots more talk here on the TDN Writers Room podcast. Thanks for tuning us in. See you next week.